The movie kicks off with a man stationed inside a car. He turns it off and walks inside a building. Eddie, an ex-soldier, is inside a recruiting agency and has had quite the accomplishments in his life, especially in the military. The woman says Eddie passed all the psyche evaluations and sees what type of work he wants to do. Seems he's happy with pretty much anything at this point, and she proceeds to tell him that based off his skill sets, they don't have a viable job for him right now. The former captain tells the woman he'll be happy for a minimum pay job and walks out. The woman chases him outside and says she can get him one, and he is happy to hear it. He accepts, and the scene jumps to marshals getting into their cars and driving off. They all make their way onto the streets, and we are told they are escorting a witness. They drive through various terrains and still have quite some time before they reach the city. The marshals' phones then cut out, and they immediately turn around and realize they are being followed. The radio also seems to be down, and the vehicles turn on their high beams. Before you know it, the marshals run over some road spikes and their vehicles go flying. Both teams immediately engage in combat. But both sides also see their men dropping like flies, and the marshals tell the witness when they give the order, she must run away. His men are getting chopped, and the witness runs away as the combat rages on. But eventually, only one marshal stands and he is killed very quickly. The armed men say they did not find their target and immediately begin sweeping the street. The scene cuts to Eddie sitting alone in a motel. With thunder and rain outside, he just sits by and eventually makes a call to his wife and says both the good news that he found a job but the bad news that he's staying away for a while. He sits on the couch quite stressed out that he cannot see his wife and child. As the night continues, Eddie makes his way to a building and waits for the security to open the door. He hands the paperwork over to a man who explains there is no overtime and it is minimum wage. Their job is guarding a shopping center, and here is the command base. He introduces himself as Vance and his teammate Mason. The third recruit they have is Ruby, who isn't looking too well. Vance says the final man in their team is Johnny and calls him to head upstairs, which gets ignored. Vance continues on by explaining that there are 5 zones, and he hands Eddie some uniform before heading out. He shows Eddie all 5 zones and says his favorite is the last one. Vance gives the rundown on the local area and speaks about its high murder rates and massive drug usage. Vance quickly deduces Eddie is from the army and tells him to make sure to remember he is the boss. With that, the shift finally begins, and Eddie, the disciplined army captain, will not take the task lightly. He looks around, but the power cuts out to the building from the massive storm outside. He quickly notices that something is off when a little girl smacks the front door. He goes to let her in, even though Vance tells him not to. Once inside, she tells Eddie they are coming and passes out. He immediately takes her to the office and is placed on the couch. They attempt to call the police, but the phone lines are down. Just then, the crew spots a man on the door and they approach him. The man says he is looking for his daughter, and Vance is happy to hear it and tells Johnny to bring her down. But Eddie thinks something is fishy and asks the man for the girl's name, to which he responds, "It's Jamie." As Vance begins unlocking the doors, Eddie continually asks him questions and he responds right every time and says his name is Charlie. But as the girl opens her eyes, she screams and runs off, which causes Vance to lock the door. A second man then approaches with a suitcase to reveal $1.25 million in unmarked bills, and Vance is told it is his if he wipes the cameras clean and gives him the girl. Vance is unsure and instead is offered an ultimatum. Either take the money and hand over the girl, or everyone inside the building will meet a cruel and vicious death. Vance buckles and goes to open the chains, but Eddie isn't having it and knocks him out. Charlie then tells Eddie the country thanks him for his service and walks off. He then makes his way to an army of mercenaries and tells them to stop the search and bring all available units to their coordinates. He tells his right-hand man, Deadeyes, he wants all units surrounding the facility. Meanwhile, Eddie calls out Jamie's name and says his story, how he has a daughter named Sylvia, and suddenly a ball comes bouncing towards him. He finds the young girl who holds him at gunpoint. He quickly takes the gun off her. She then forces him to promise not to let her get hurt. Later, Mason quickly identifies the girl as the witness who saw her own father dying against a bloodthirsty crime syndicate and was supposed to testify the following day. The group, except for Eddie, begin to get frightened, and with no support, they see multiple men approach their facility through the cameras. Eddie barks orders, and Vance quickly goes to hide the girl in a secret spot. She is given a flashlight, water, and a walkie-talkie. Eddie tells her under no circumstance is she to leave the room. Outside the facility, the 4 of the guards see their cars being torn apart, and Mason says he is leaving. Eddie remains unmoved, and Vance tells Mason that Eddie is the new boss. Eddie tells Mason either hide or fight, that's the only way he can survive the night. They all immediately get to work, setting up some barricades and traps, preparing for the onslaught ahead. Charlie gives his men the go signals, and they run a car through the front door. Eddie lights a fire and sets the car underneath, as well as the man ablaze. The team is immediately shot at and are forced to move, but one of their enemies makes it to the rooftop. As Vance is slacking around, the same enemy jumps onto him and they fight. Out of nowhere, Ruby kills the mercenary and the others outside clean the mess they made. Vance breaks the cameras and tells Ruby what happened as the mercenary upstairs opens his eyes. Eddie then tells his entire team this is simply about buying time and surviving the night. Johnny begins making bombs, a secret no one knew he could do. The others set up as much traps as they have the availability to do. And with that, they wait for the impending doom. Eddie then spots Jamie walking around and she tells him she has an idea. The scene jumps to the mercenaries entering the facility, led by Charlie. They begin making their way around the building and the security detail await them. The mercenaries try and get the camera feed and walk towards the first trap. One of their men is electrocuted to death, but the others make their way inside. Jamie uses a toy cart to approach the enemies, and it is taken to Charlie, who sees a radio channel on the car. His hacker opens up the channel line, and Charlie gets into contact with Eddie. This time, Eddie tells Charlie to back off or face the consequences. Charlie then speaks with the entire security detail and offers them a bonus of $100,000 each, including the $1.25 million for the girl. But if she survives, he will hunt down each one of them, including their families. The gang then continues to walk around and make their way to the next trap. Ruby distracts the mercenaries and fires an arrow at them. But this does not work and they fire at her instead. When they stop, they see Ruby lifeless and move along. But fortunately enough, she was merely faking it. Now it's Vance's turn. He injures an enemy and runs off. Even Mason electrocutes a man and uses his gun to kill off another. Eddie begins moving around the building towards Mason and spots a few adversaries. He calls them all, and they begin shooting at him. He gets away, and the sniper outside alerts Charlie the county sheriff is approaching. Charlie orders a ceasefire, and Johnny holds his finger on a trigger. The sheriff begins driving around the facility, and Johnny gets a little excited and goes to alert him. Eddie says to stop, but as he doesn't listen, it results in a bullet to his head. Eddie jumps on the walkie and alerts the others that Johnny is dead, and the men are not playing. Eddie tells Mason he wants some eyes on the food court, and if he doesn't move, they'll kill him. Mason tells Eddie he cannot move, and Jamie says she'll use the car to look at the men in the food court. She takes her remote car and spots 5 men inside. The mercenaries chase the car, and Eddie tackles the first man, then uses him as cover to grab 2 guns and absolutely obliterate the rest of the men. One tackles him from behind and he takes him out as well as one more. In the meantime, Ruby and Vance link up, but Ruby gets injured and Vance carries her to safety. Eddie finally wakes up and uses some badass skills. He grabs Mason and they join the others and close a gate to protect themselves. Charlie is enraged and wants to finish the job himself. Vance lies Ruby down, who is very injured, and Eddie gives Jamie a taser in case things get bad. The two have a heartfelt conversation, and Jamie speaks about her 2 dead parents and the tragic story of how they died. Charlie then speaks on the radio and wants to have a chat. He says there is one more line of defense and offers them the money won last time. Eddie bluntly tells him no, and they prepare for the final encounter. Mason spots cops on the cameras outside and the group rejoices. Eddie sees the enemy communication truck outside and wants to take it out. The enemy in the meantime easily penetrate the last line of defense and are met by a heavy barrage of gunfire by Vance. He manages to take out a few, and the police finally arrive on the scene. They hold Eddie at gunpoint, and Vance starts throwing bombs and requests backup. He kills multiple enemies, and Charlie just smirks. The cops want the location of their witness, and Eddie tells Mason to bring her over. Vance says he'll provide cover fire for the 2 of them to make it to safety. With a broken voice and tears, he stands up and shoots at the enemies. He gives Mason and Jamie the time needed to quickly run past the mercenaries, and he is laying injured on the ground. He still takes out 2 more enemies but stops moving. Back with Eddie, he analyzes the cops and sees a gang tattoo on one of their necks, and when Mason appears, he is killed and Eddie fights back while Jamie flees. Eddie grapples with one mercenary and uses his gun to kill the other 3 in front of him. He mourns the loss of Mason and gets back to work. He speaks with Jamie and tells her to go to Vance, but quickly realizes he is dead. Instead, he tells her that she needs to be brave and make her own way to the storeroom. He then tells her he wants to disable the radio jammer to alert emergency services. She tells Eddie she is ready, and Eddie clocks his gun. He gets to work and begins popping every enemy in his sights. He makes his way through a hallway and grabs a bike on display. As he speeds through, no one can touch him, but Dead Eyes locks eyes with him and begins sprinting towards him. He fires shots, and in the meantime Jamie hides while Charlie is in the same room. He tells her that no one is coming and there is no evidence of anything. Dead Eyes meanwhile jumps onto Eddie's bike and knocks him off. The 2 start whacking each other back and forth. Eddie understands this is no easy adversary, but after getting injured, Eddie uses his handcuffs to hurt Deadeyes. He then pulls a mad stunt with the bike and escapes. He then uses the bike to collide with the communication van outside, which is blocking the signal, and destroys it. He radios Jamie and Charlie hears this. The sniper begins firing shots at Eddie and Charlie finds the walkie-talkie. She quickly grabs another and alerts the real cops to the situation, and Charlie shoots at her. The sniper outside is about to kill Eddie until Deadeyes tells him to stop as he wants to kill him. Eddie begins firing a gun into the bushes and kills the sniper, then expertly kills Deadeyes in the process. He begins dropping to the ground from the bullet wound he just copped. Charlie in the meantime hears that the FBI is on the way. He begins talking to himself, clearly aware that Jamie can hear him. He tells her his own tragic story of how his father died and makes Jamie a deal. He tells her that he will let her live with him on the condition she never testifies. He sounds quite sincere about it, and she goes running once more. He tells her to be brave and take the offer. He gives her the last chance and grabs her. But Eddie pops out of nowhere and Charlie tells him to just take the money and go. Jamie then uses the taser as Eddie shoots Charlie dead. Jamie gets up and helps Eddie outside as the emergency services arrive. The FBI stand there with their guns out and want Eddie's hands in the air. He walks towards the FBI clearly injured and Jamie gives him a hug. This is enough for the police to understand he is not the enemy. It also seems that Vance somehow survived the massacre, and the scene jumps to Eddie in the hospital where Jamie waits for him. She quickly says she is being moved away and wanted to say thank you and goodbye to him. Jamie then spots her uncle and gives him a hug. Eddie watches this and feels quite bad as he hasn't seen his daughter in quite some time. Later on, that's exactly where he travels to. He is finally reunited with his beautiful daughter and wife, and that's the end of this movie. If you enjoyed it, make sure to smash that subscribe button and I'll see you on the next one.